Hey, my name's Josh. Welcome to Read the Bible Online. I've been following Jesus since I was a kid, and I love reading the Bible. And one of the things I love about reading the Bible is you get to know Jesus. And he's changed my life. And so, what we're going to do in these shots is take about 5 minutes together just to read a short section of the Gospel of Mark so that you and I can get to know Jesus better. Now, I hope if you're reading along with me, you've got access to a Bible somewhere. Maybe it's a paper Bible like this one, or maybe you've got it on your phone or another screen. But we're going to read together. So if you're new to picking up a Bible, what are we looking at? Well, it's kind of a book that has two halves. There's the Old Testament, which is what God's been doing in the world to get people ready for Jesus to come. And then there's the New Testament, where it's the second half. Jesus turns up. We meet him, see what he does, and all the things that happen after that. So we're kind of starting at the start of the New Testament in the book of Mark, which is one of the accounts of Jesus' life. This week we're going to look at Mark chapter 1, verses 9 to 13. And I'd love you to read along, and if you're joining, feel free to comment in the chat. I'll wrap up after we'll read it. I'll make one or two comments, and then if you've got some questions, feel free to post them in the chat. We can interact with those for a while. Otherwise, we'll just keep it short and sweet. Let's get into it. Mark chapter 1, verses 9 to 13. At that time, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. Just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw heaven being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." At once the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and angels attended him. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? I wonder, what were your first impressions? What came to mind? Well, what we saw last week in chapter 1, verses 1 to 8, was that a guy called John came, and he prepared people for God to arrive. He was baptizing on the river, in the River Jordan, which is kind of on the western edge of the land of Israel. And people from the capital city, Jerusalem, and the southern region, Judea, were going out to him, going out to the desert, repenting, like publicly turning back to God, and then crossing back into the land again. And all this was accompanied by John telling them, "Get ready, the one coming after me is going to baptize you with the Holy Spirit." And at that time, we read verse 9, Jesus comes. He comes from the north in Nazareth, which is a town, in Galilee, which is the northern region. And he joins in. He's baptized by John in the Jordan. It's kind of odd, isn't it? I wonder why he did that. I wonder if you've got thoughts there. But as he comes back through the water, something different happens. It stands out, doesn't it? Verse 10. Heaven gets torn open. This is what Jesus sees. And the Spirit descends on him like a dove. What's happening there? Well, it's an incredible thing, isn't it? Jesus is seeing, if you like, into heaven, and the Spirit of God coming down upon him. And then God speaks, verse 11. And you imagine if heaven's being torn open, the Spirit of God's coming down, and God is speaking, the thing you're about to hear is massively important. This is like crazy stuff that's happening. But this is a particular message for Jesus. Verse 11, the voice says, "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." And it's amazing for us, isn't it? Because we get to eavesdrop on this. This is what Jesus is hearing. God say to him, "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." Now there's some words that are kind of carefully chosen, I think, by God to speak to his Son there. It's not just telling Jesus who he is. It's not just telling us that Jesus is the Son of God. But telling Jesus something particular to prepare him for what's about to happen. That he is the Son, the one that God has chosen to be the King, the Messiah, the Christ. The one we read about in chapter 1, verse 1, the chosen one of God. Because God had made huge promises about his Son in the Old Testament. Like in Psalm 2, God said about the king of Israel, I'm going to make you my son, and you're the one who's going to rule all the nations. Or in, I think it's Isaiah 42, I'm just flipping back, here's another prophet. Just try to remember this. If you've got a Bible, you might want to look this up as well. Isaiah 42, verse 1, God said through Isaiah, "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I'll put my spirit on him, and he'll bring justice to the nations." And that's kind of what's happening, isn't it? That's that moment. It's the Spirit's coming down, God saying, "You're the one I delight in, I love. You're the one who's going to bring justice," which is like peace and order and righteousness across not just one part in Israel, but across the whole world. So who's turned up in the river this day? It's God saying, "Here is Jesus. He is my son, the king who's going to rule everybody forever, the one I put my spirit on, the one I love, and he's going to bring justice to the world." Wow, what an introduction to Jesus. And then straight away, verses 12 and 13, he goes out into the wilderness. So rather than going back into Israel, it's like he goes back out into the wilderness, verse 12. The Spirit sends him out. And he's in the wilderness 40 days being tempted by Satan. It's got more Old Testament images there, doesn't it? Israel, when God rescued them out of Egypt, he called them his son. He's like, "You're going to be my son." And he led them through the wilderness into the promised land. But that whole journey took 40 years. It was a journey where God tested his people to see if they would be faithful to him. And again they failed that. But here comes the Son of God, if you like, the true Israel. He goes out into the wilderness and he has his own mini temptation. He's there 40 days being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals and angels attended him. So I think what we're seeing is here comes the Son. He's the rescuer, he's the king, he's the servant, the one who's going to bring justice to the nations. He's the true Israel. He goes through the testing experience, and then we'll find out tomorrow what that's preparing him for. Well, thanks for joining in today, reading the Bible. I think we've had a few streaming and technical difficulties today, so I just want to apologise for that. Hopefully we can sort those out next time. And if you've been reading along, I want to ask you, who do you think Jesus is? Who do you think Jesus is? Well, thanks for joining me. I'll catch you later.